Hard work pays off. Dreams come true. Bad times don't last, but bad guys do.
When I was growing up in the 90s, I remember our living room had a moderately sized television that sat on the floor. I spent countless hours sitting cross-legged or sprawled out watching my favorite TV shows. Flash, Swamp Thing, Lois and Clark, Highlander, you name it, I was watching it. It probably accounts for why my posture is really bad nowadays. By the mid-90s, television was pretty booming, and Fox announced a show about a African-American biophysicist turned superhero, airing in the notorious Friday night death slot. For those of you who didn't exist before streaming, Friday nights for most shows, not all shows, some shows beat the odds, but for most shows were where networks put series that they expected to be canceled. Because back in the 90s, and today to an extent, nobody was watching TV on Friday nights. We were out doing things. Nobody was sitting in front of their television. But I was, though. Now, Blade is widely considered the first serious black superhero movie. And it was awesome. I think we can all agree on that. But 4 years before Wesley Snipes was cutting down vampires with the Daywalker sword, Carl Lumbly was saving the city from evildoers in Port Columbia, making him the first black superhero-focused franchise to air on television primetime. MANTIS follows renowned biophysicist Dr. Miles Hawkins, who is wheelchair-bound after being shot in the back by police officers while trying to save a little girl in the middle of a riot. Miles uses his vast intellect and resources to develop the, wait for it, mechanically augmented neurotransmission interception system exoskeleton, or MANTIS for short, and now operates nocturnally as a city vigilante, similar to Batman or CW's Arrow, I guess. The series was created by Sam Raimi, you might have heard of him, and Sam Hamm, both whom have a decent amount of pedigree up until this point. Even prior to the show, which aired in 1994, Raimi had been lead writer for Darkman, a movie starring Liam Neeson, which shared some similarities as Mantis. A brilliant scientist becomes a vigilante-esque character. And Hamm, on the other hand, had done a lot of writing for Tim Burton's Batman movies. Needless to say, it would have been my assessment that the series was in good hands, at least at the time. Hindsight is 2020, though, as we all know. The two were responsible for creating the pilot episode of the show, but would remain on the show in title only, as executive producers for everything that followed. So what we have here is a tale, and this tale is of 3 different Mantis shows. I know, for a series that only existed for a very short time, 1 season, it really went through a lot of changes, which one could argue are ultimately responsible for its cancellation. The original creation that Raimi and Hamm had envisioned, and indeed was evident in the pilot movie, and then the serialized show that would follow after Fox greenlit it. The pilot movie was a very ambitious attempt to do an African-American centric superhero with African-American centric plot devices, largely influenced by persistent issues faced by black communities. With a predominantly black cast, the pilot is set in the fictional metropolis of Ocean City, a gritty urban landscape situated on the West Coast. Dr. Miles Hawkins, played by Carl Lumbly, whom most of us know as the voice of John Jones from the animated Justice League, or more recently, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But in the show, he plays a brilliant biophysicist who is paralyzed from the waist down after being shot in the back by a police officer while rescuing a small child during a riot, which very much and intentionally paralleled the 1992 riots in LA. This incident awakens a calling of sorts in Dr. Hawkins, who creates the Mantis suit and begins hunting down criminal activity at night. Up until this point, Dr. Hawkins had kind of been like this very stuck up, didn't really care about the problems of people below him. He very much had the attitude, I made it, look at me, I made it, so there's no excuse. So that was very much his mentality that he had prior to his accident. accident. And then, of course, after the accident, you know, life-changing event, he kind of, like I say, has this awakening where he feels like he needs to do something about what's going on in the community. So for a 1.5-hour pilot movie, it covered some pretty heavy topics: police corruption, political racism, gang violence. The cast of supporting characters is pretty explosive array of actors, many of who would go on to do some very iconic roles. However, when Fox greenlit the series, they did so with stipulations. They wanted to bring in new showrunners and take the series in a pretty completely different direction than the one established by Sam Raimi and Ham. Several reasons for the retooling of the show were given by Fox executives, saying the show was too grim and too realistic. It suffered from too many plot holes. It had a lot of characters with no stories to bring to the series, and that the show needed to be more multicultural. Yeah, I'll let you form your own opinions as to whether those are valid excuses or not, but clearly the original cast was under the belief that it was because the show was heavily lined with black culture, black stories, and black people. Even Carl Lumbly, who was one of the only remaining cast members to remain in the series, said in an interview that he believed the drastic alterations of the show had to do with the color of the cast. So fast forward to the serialized version of the show, only Carl Lumbly remained, and a very basic backstory of his character. He was paralyzed, but the origin of being shot in the back by a police officer was entirely cut out. It's not addressed. The rest of the story was built from the ground up, and racial politics were largely avoided entirely. The exoskeleton that Dr. Hawkins wears was also altered to be more of a sleek, superhero-y stylized suit, whereas the original design was Lumley wearing a trench coat, no doubt inspired by Raimi's work on Darkman. I like the change in the suit. I do. That's one of the changes that I actually did like. From the pilot to the actual serialized TV series. The cast saw the additions of actor Roger Rees, who played John Stonebreak, Miles' best friend, co-creator of the MANTIS suit, and equally as brilliant. Roger Rees is a fantastic actor, maybe most known for his hilarious portrayal as the Sheriff of Nottingham in Robin Hood Men in Tights. Going back and watching some of the episodes in preparation for this video was kind of bittersweet because he passed away in 2015. So, you know, it's always bittersweet when you go back and watch these old things and see these old actors that you grew up with and you kind of look them up, because really, I mean, I haven't seen him in anything in a while, obviously. So as I was doing this video, I decided to kind of Google some of the actors in it, and unfortunately he passed away in 2015. Chris Garton, who I will always remember from Tremors 2, plays a somewhat annoying bike courier and Mantis groupie that eventually uncovers his identity and just kind of inserts himself into the group. Lastly, another actor gone too soon, Galen Gorg, plays Lieutenant Leora Maxwell, police officer and eventual love interest of Dr. Hawkins. She had a seriously bona fide cult classic record, making appearances in Star Trek Voyagers, Deep Space Nine, RoboCop 2, Twin Peaks, Point Break, Xena, Hercules, and Stargate SG-1. So she is heavily embedded into this, not niche anymore, but back then it was kind of this niche cult culture. The first half of the season is Team Mantis taking on a variety of high-tech crimes, corruption, gangs, crime, and evading police as they stubbornly try to discover the identity of the vigilante. Most of it, while a bit sci-fi, is based on some understanding of reality. You know, sounds pretty familiar. I mean, it's pretty formulaic superhero TV show season 1 arc, if I'm being honest. There's nothing wrong with that, really. Season 1 of superhero shows are always about introducing the main characters, finding out what motivates them, throwing different character angles at the wall to see what type of chemistry everyone has with one another. You'll generally have the main character slowly test the limits and boundaries of their newfound powers. In the Mantis's case, it's kind of like this superhuman speed, strength, and agility, and a bunch of really cool engineered suit gadgets and capabilities. My favorite being these cool paralyzation darts that he can shoot at people and just stops them in the dead of their tracks. We also typically get to see where the heroes set up their home base, which I gotta say is pretty cool in the show. Instead of a Batcave or a fortress of solitude or a quiver in the Arrow's case, Team Mantis has set up a shop deep underwater in a laboratory called the Sea Pod, complete with the most up-to-date equipment and a flying submarine car named Chrysalis for good measure. The show is in the process of kind of discovering itself, and I was enjoying it, but unfortunately, low ratings tend to make for ANSI Studios. Instead of allowing the actors and showrunners an opportunity to find their footing and possibly hit their stride, executives wanted to, quote quote-unquote fix the show mid-season, which we know never goes well, steering away from some of its more realistic storylines in favor of a more fantastical, supervillain-ish of the week style show. I'm gonna be honest here, the second part of the season is a bit silly and ludicrous, but it's actually fun to watch. And you can see an attempt of new writers trying to make it a more comic book style show. Alternate dimension beings who pass back and forth between our world and theirs. Time traveling, magicians bent on turning the city's teenagers into killers. Crazy professors trying to shut down the city's power and water supply. And this guy. Yeah, he was actually terrifying. But the show had suffered too much decline in ratings by this point and has lost its sense of what it was originally supposed to be pretty much entirely. And the studio ended up terminating it before the season finale ever even aired. That's right, watching this in 1994 and 1995, the show just abruptly ends. It wasn't until years later when the show was subsequently picked up and rerun on, I think, the Sci-Fi Channel, that viewers actually got to see the ending. I'm oftentimes mystified by how bad the season finale actually was and wonder if humanity might have been spared had it simply never aired. This series is over 20 years old, but in the off chance that I have compelled any of you to go back and watch it, I'm going to throw up a spoiler warning here. The final episode, titled Ghost of Ice, was written by David Kemper, who would later go on to be showrunner for Farscape. Humble beginnings might be an understatement. Dr. Hawkins and his team are lost in the mountains when they encounter, oh, this is painful, an invisible and bulletproof dinosaur named Harvey. Yeah, apparently it was invisible because the show ran out of a budget and couldn't afford any CGI for it. Why and how did this dinosaur come into existence? Who knows? We don't know. We'll never know. It's a completely random concoction that has nothing to do with the characters and plays no real emotional role in the climax of the series. If that wasn't bad enough, hold on to your hat because the next one's a real doozy. The series ends when Dr. Hawkins and his love interest, Leora, find themselves trapped in an old beat-up truck as the invisible monster slowly strips the roof off of it. Dr. Hawkins lovingly looks at Leora as he ignites a fuel cell that ends up killing the dinosaur, but killing himself and Leora as well. To this day, I have yet to come across a series with a worse final episode. Our main hero doesn't go out in a blaze of glory, protecting the city he loves. He doesn't march off into the sunset with the woman he loves. Heck, he doesn't even save the woman he loves. He dies because of an invisible dinosaur named Harvey on a mountain. So why do I like the Mantis? It's a fair question. The show is objectively not great. Writing's all over the place. It's inconsistent. It's clear that there was a vision, but the vision was never followed or seen through. But I think it goes greater and maybe deeper than that. I think the fact that I could see, especially now as I'm a little bit older and I go back and watch it, I can see the initial vision. And underneath all that other stuff, I can still see it there and appreciate it. But I think there's also obviously an enormous nostalgia factor when it comes to this show. So maybe somebody who's a bit younger, who didn't grow up in the 90s, and never seen this show before, their first time laying eyes on it is after this review, might not have the same experience. Might not even be able to get through 3 or 4 episodes. But for me, it's a harken back to an age where times were a little bit simpler. You got home from school and you played outside until the sun went down. And then you came inside and jumped on the floor and flipped on the television in excitement for your favorite TV show, whatever that was. And Mantis wasn't my favorite TV show, but all those superhero genre TV shows were it for me. I loved them. I grew up reading comic books in the dark underneath my bed, Spawn in particular. So all those superhero TV shows were just it for me. The Flash, Lois and Clark, Nightman, yes, that video essay is coming. The Mantis, all of those shows I was very heavily invested in. And again, you can go back and watch them. They're objectively not great, but it's that nostalgia factor that does it for me. It's that Mantis, I remember specifically watching this show and just kind of being pulled into it. I see the car that he's flying all over the night city, the Chrysalis, and I kind of like imagine myself in the car, or the sea pod that's deep below the water surface underneath the city. And I kind of like go to my room and imagine that's the sea pod. And I think it's those different aspects of the show, in addition to all the crime fighting stuff and the wonderful acting that Carl Lumbly always does. But I think it's those little things like that. As a kid that kind of inspired the imagination and gave me that escapism that I look for anytime I watch anything. I want to be transported away. I want to be taken somewhere. So I'm going to invest the time in the show. I'm going to do my best to enjoy it, but I also want to be transported. And for me, the Mantis did that. And I even went back and watched it several years ago as an adult, and it still did it again to me. And again, I think a lot of that, as I said earlier, was nostalgia factor. So somebody just going into the show might not get the same reaction. But for me, Mantis will always hold a dear, close, warm spot in my heart. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. I would be much appreciated. That's all my time. I will see you on the other side.